Hello, Cubs fans, and welcome to a brand new edition of Cubs on Tap. I am Ron Luce, joined tonight by the one and only Joe Maris. We are here, unfortunately, talking about a Cubs loss, but before we get into the baseball action, Joe, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. Like we were talking before this is the first game I've really gotten to sit down and watch, and for it feels like forever. Some person who's got engaged this weekend, so
yeah,
drink some red wine to that.
I'll cheers you. I don't have any alcohol, unfortunately, right now, but I'll cheers you to that, buddy.
Yeah, so it's been quite the weekend. So it was nice to sit down and watch the game, but I'm a superstitious person, so I kind of saw the loss coming.
You're not superstitious. You're just a little issuous.
Right.
Just a little stitious. I feel that. No, I mean, I hear you, man. But congratulations. Obviously,
Thank
big
you.
news for you. But I hear you, man. Like, it's been nice kind of riding this wave of Cubs baseball. And unfortunately, it did kind of feel like, can they make it 8? Like, this might be where it ends.
Yeah, now the season's officially over.
Officially, right? Well, and on top of that, though, I'll tell you what, though, I think we ultimately, the collective we, got what we wanted out of this game because Cody and I talked about it in yesterday's episode, that just make it a competitive game. And they did that tonight. Obviously, for those that may be tuning in that for some reason didn't catch the game, Cubs lose 4-3 to the Reds. Close game. Ultimately, Castellanos gets a bomb in this one for the Reds. Manrod gets dinged up a little bit for the Cubbies, so unfortunately that happened. But three solo home runs from the Cubs tonight. Wilson, Rafael Ortega, and Ian Happ all going deep, and we'll talk about Ian Happ here in a little bit. But Joe, I want to get your thoughts just overall on how you felt today's game went, because again, really, if you look at the scorecard for the Cubs, 8 total hits for the team, 3 of which came from Ian Happ. So what were your thoughts on the offense tonight, and just, I guess, the overall synopsis of the game in your eyes?
It was kind of a boring game. You said 8 hits, 3 of them coming from Happ. Wade Miley's no joke. I mean, he's a good pitcher. The thing I love about Wade Miley is that dude just has such a great pace to him, and it really keeps the hitters on his toes. And they're talking about on the broadcast, he doesn't have that same third time through the order rise in batting average against. That dude just goes out there and competes all the way through the third time through the order. He's a really good pitcher, and he's dominated the Cubs this year. But so he's done that to everybody. But like you mentioned, Ian Happ with 3 hits, 2 of those coming from the right side. A little bit of a cheapie infield hit, but we'll take it. The other base hit through the middle. And then that big 3-run homer. I think that was a really pivotal moment, kind of. You see, he had 2 really bad strike calls on him. First 2 pitches, fastball out, fastball in, strike calls. And that wasn't the zone the entire game. It was just a weird 2 strike calls. He didn't, usually in those situations, see the hitter kind of turn around at the ump and be like, what the hell did you just do? But Happ kept himself nice, calm, and collected. And I don't know if it was that next pitch or a pitch after, they tried to go up with the fastball again, and the dude just belted it to left center. Yeah. So, it's easy to give up after 2 really bad strike calls to get you down 0-2. Yeah. And he just didn't let it get to him. And ultimately it ended in a ball in the seats, which is awesome. So especially, I'm sure for him it feels good too to have hits from both sides of the plate in the same game. But the dude is all kinds of hot right now, and it's just fun to watch.
Yeah, he absolutely is all kinds of hot. And you mentioned Ian Happ. This isn't going to sound impressive on the surface, but he's raised that batting average all the way to 219, and his OPS is now 725, which all things considered, where he was just maybe a month and a half ago, I mean, that's an incredible rise for him. And you mentioned tonight, 3 hits, obviously the solo home run to make things interesting late in this one. And he has been riding really hot. And I know Cody and I got to talk a little bit about him over the weekend quite a bit, just how it really feels like he's at least saving his job with the Cubs for another year. And sure, maybe it is more in a corner outfield spot. Maybe he's not the everyday center fielder, and that's fine, because it seems like he's almost playing better when he plays out in the corner outfield. And whether that's a direct correlation or not remains to be seen. I wouldn't know about that. But yeah, going back to Wade Miley, man, I mean, you nailed it on the head. Great game from him tonight. He gets his 12th win of the season, 7 innings, 5 hits, only the 1 earned. on the Contreras bomb, and 8 strikeouts. He didn't walk anybody. Fun fact: the Cubs did not walk as a team tonight at all. All 3 Reds pitchers keeping the Cubs away from getting any free passes. So that's obviously huge and a huge key to success to win a ball game if you can keep the team off the base paths, especially for free. You wouldn't know it, ladies and gentlemen. I just got done calling a volleyball game, and I'm all tongue-tied all over the place. But Scott from Iowa chiming in here. He just says it looks like the sun's out, guns out episode. Yeah, a little bit. I mean, these really aren't – I wouldn't call them sun. I would call them in need of sun because I am about as pale as you can possibly get. But getting back into the game, man, I mean, a guy who, like we said, has not been pale is Ian Happ. He's been super hot, and it's been great to see. Love seeing Ortega come off the bench tonight, too, and get a big home run in a pinch-hitting situation. Alfonso Rivas, his late inning, hit, just a guy that continues to just show incredible prowess, especially, in the essence of the contact game. And sure, I mean, Schwindel, if we're being honest, he should have probably had a hit if it's not for Farmer there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that could have been the game-tying home run then ultimately from Ian Happ when he was due next up. But another thing that I really want to get your thoughts on too, Joe, is the kind of Wilson Contreras finally looking healthy. I think it is such a big thing that people are maybe missing because he obviously just came back the other day from the IL. He had a couple of games in AAA Iowa just to get his legs back under him again. And he's looked good. 2 hits yesterday in that one. Obviously the big home run in today's game. And he's back in the leadoff spot where we've seen him quite a bit this season. So what are you looking to see? Because I feel like he's a guy that we really need to see some things out of the rest of the season, not necessarily from like, he needs to secure his job from next year, but just like hey man, like we want to see you fully healthy and feel like he's getting back into the swing. Cause I feel like this year, maybe this is just my personal thoughts based on how he's played, but I feel like he's been really dinged up the whole year. And then it was finally like, okay, it's too much. Let's shut him down for a little while. Let him get healthy. Because it feels like he really, truly is healthy now because he's looked good the last couple of days. So what are your thoughts on Wilson Contreras, especially after tonight's game?
I think you're totally right that it would just be like, hey, let's see something. Let's give us something to show us that you're healthy, these last however many games. I think today you really saw him swinging just ferociously. He wasn't holding anything back with those swings. And what's really telling on his health and how he's feeling is when you swing and miss. If you're swinging full go and you swing and miss and you're hurt, that's going to hurt 10 times over again. That is when you really feel it. If you're not making contact when you swing, that's when all that pain is exaggerated. So I think he struck out. He struck out at least once next time he broke his bat over his knee. But stuff like that is just a little bit of telltale signs that he's feeling good enough to really go out there and just swing hard. And it turned into a line drive homer today. It's kind of funny that Dempster in the pregame today, he had Wilson Contreras. He's like something about it today. He's like, I feel Contreras is really going to show us something today, and he did. And it's just nice to have his presence back in the lineup. We've seen these guys fight back time and time again over the last month and 3 weeks. And that's all been without Wilson Contreras, who, regardless of how he's playing, is the team's leader now. And I know he's ready for that. I'm sure the team respects him with everything. I don't doubt that for 1 second. So it's nice to see him back in that lineup. I don't know if I want to see him hitting leadoff, but that has part to do with the lack of right-handed hitting options. And Hermosillo, they mentioned before the game that he's been dealing with some stuff, and that's why he's not in the lineup against a left-handed pitcher. But yeah, I mean, he's going out there and he's swinging 100%, so that's a good sign. And he's back behind the plate. We don't have to deal with a revolver of catchers, hopefully, and hopefully that's something that they really, really make a priority this offseason, is to get a reliable backup catcher.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly helps. You mentioned backup catchers. I think right now fortunate DFA originally of Chirinos, allowing him to be signed by the Cubs at the time that they did. And obviously getting Romine back with some level of health was huge as well because he missed so much of the early part of the season with that nagging injury that he had since spring training. But yeah, I mean, it has been quite the ride of catchers this season. I mean, we've seen everybody from Higgins to
Walters.
Walters to, obviously Lobaton for like 4 games before he ended his year, to Chirinos, to Romine, to now finally, having 3 catchers that are all healthy and all have major league experience, which I think is huge. But I agree with you. I agree with you. I think that's something they really need to focus on, because you look at years past, even in the years that Wilson was still the number 1, you still had guys like Avila that they went and got at the trade deadline for that 1 year. You still had some pretty reliable second catchers. And I think they would have had that with Romine had he not gotten hurt. I think that was a huge thing, but still certainly something they need to look into, right? Whether they think Romine's the guy for next year, or they want to bring in somebody else, or maybe they hang on to a guy like Chirinos if he's done enough to truly earn another contract with this team. But I agree with you. I think they definitely need that. Willie's always been kind of a little banged up. He plays a lot. He plays a very aggressive style of a game. So he's going to get those little nicks and knacks, especially as a catcher. I feel like it's just destined to happen. Right. So I agree with you there. I think a good backup catcher in the offseason is a big thing.
Think about the effect it could have on some of the young pitchers. I mean, think of 3 young pitchers that, ring to mind, starting pitchers at least: Alzolay, Steele, and Thompson. You want Contreras behind the plate catching those guys when they're pitching for the rest of the season. We're not doing them any favors by giving them Romine or Chirinos, and no disrespect to those guys, but we want our starting catcher to be catching the guys that are trying themselves out for a spot next year.
Yeah.
Especially the young prospects who we're really hoping can kind of blossom. And then you think about even Cody Hoyer and Scott Efros, who maybe can kind of etch himself a bullpen spot for next season.
Yep.
You want Contreras back there for when those guys are pitching. So hopefully we can get that the rest of the season.
Absolutely. I agree with you, man. I think just a clean bill of health for Wilson the rest of the way is, if nothing else, just a good way for him to end 2021 and hopefully carry some good momentum into spring training then here in 2022. Because, I mean, like you said, he's pretty much the undisputed leader of the team right now, and he's going to be your number 1 catcher next year. Like, barring some crazy, in my opinion, unforeseen turn of events,
right,
he's going to be your catcher next season for the Chicago Cubs. Some fun comments here. Good news is we didn't help the Cardinals tonight, but they didn't help themselves. You always love to see digs at the Cardinals because they're the Cardinals. But an interesting question here, because Adrian Sampson, we didn't get to talk too much about yet in this one, goes 5 innings in this game, gives up 6 hits, only the 2 runs. A walk and 2 strikeouts, obviously the 2 home runs. His ERA still at 2.20. I mean, very impressive. He is 0-2, though, because he gets the loss tonight. But Scott from Iowa jumping in our comments here says, where do you see Sampson next year? And I think that's fair, because we haven't gotten to see a ton of him yet. Obviously, he very recently came up to the Cubs, hasn't gotten a ton of work. I think after tonight's game now, he's finally at like 16 of the 3rd innings on the season at the big league level. So a guy we haven't seen much from. But in that limited amount of action, he hasn't looked terrible. I mean, he entered tonight's action with a below 2 ERA. Obviously, a little inflated now because of the 2 runs he gave up tonight. Like we mentioned, 2.20 is now where his ERA sits for the season. But I think he's definitely a guy that, if all plays out correctly, and Joe, I also obviously want to get your opinion on this as well with Sampson, but I think to me, he's the perfect type of guy that if you can keep him around on a relatively cheap contract, that's the kind of guy you want in AAA Iowa. Like that's the guy that can quickly come up. Sure, he's not a big name. Sure, he's not some highly touted prospect. He's not a flashy. Ooh, this guy's coming up. But he just gets the job done. He fills in where you need him to. It might not be the prettiest outing ever. Again, only 2 Ks tonight, but so be it. I mean, he gives you 5 solid innings. You were in the ball game when he left the game. Only being down the 1 run. I think that he's the perfect example of that 6th or 7th arm that the Cubs, I think, originally were looking for this year with guys like Shelby Miller when they brought them in. I think he's that perfect guy that, and as Scott from Iowa noted, he only threw 70 pitches tonight. I mean, 5 innings and you get through 5 and 70 pitches. I don't think he has a spot in the rotation next year, just from the standpoint of they have too many high leverage arms that are probably going to take up those spots. You mentioned 3 of those names potentially. I say potentially just because the jury's still out on a guy like Keegan Thompson, but I fully expect Alzolay and Steele to have rotation spots next season. So, and Mills probably gets a spot too, and then Hendricks is going to be. So really, it's 1 spot, and if they sign somebody, that takes care of that most likely. So, but to me, perfect guy is that 6th or 7th starter that you keep in Iowa can come up, make a couple spot starts for you if there's an injury or something, and you really aren't ready to go trade for somebody or something like that. I think that's where I see Samson next year. But Joe, what do you see out of him, especially based on tonight? Because again, all things considered, sure he gets the loss, but he looked pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he gave up those 2 quick solo homers in the first inning to India and Castellanos, and then he had a bad first inning. There's no two ways around it. Even the outs were loud outs. The 6 of the balls in play were over 100 miles an hour. So that's not great. But he went 4 more innings after that. And like you said, only 70 pitches. So he's made 6 appearances with the Cubs so far. 2 of them have been starts.
Mm-hmm.
He's done a pretty good job. I mean, there's really not else you could, nothing much you can ask from him besides what he's given you. He had 8 ground ball outs, and you look at like you said, 16 and a third innings, 16 hits, and only 3 walks or 13 strikeouts. So he's keeping traffic generally pretty low. And I think you hit it right on the head. I think his ceiling is kind of that swing man, if he can stay in the big leagues. Kind of what we've seen Alec Mills do, but more notably, we've seen Travis Wood and Mike Montgomery do, where somebody gets hurt, where they have to miss 3 or 4 starts. Boom, Adrian Sampson makes those 3 or 4 starts, something like that. And then in the meantime, he can, on a 2 minutes notice, he can throw 3 innings out of the bullpen for you. So I think that's his upside if he stays with the Cubs. But yeah, I mean, he's got a lot of Alec Mills quality with that 8 ground ball outs today with a little bit more velocity. So maybe that's why you think he could stick in the bullpen, because you don't really want guys throwing 89 out of the bullpen. So, that's what makes me think maybe he's best out of the bullpen, but who knows? I mean, who knows if he'll even be with the Cubs next year? I'm not sure what kind of contract he's on, but
sure.
I think, his ceiling really is that swing man that we've seen Travis Wood, Mike Montgomery, and even Alec Mills fill.
Yeah. And I mean, let's be straight up, and even, it kind of ties into the idea, even when he was their swingman, Alec Mills was very consistent. You wrote a great article about every team needing an Alec Mills this year. Direct everybody over to ontapsportsnet.com to go check that article out. But yeah, consistency. And he's been consistent. He's giving you what you expect from him. He's not going to be flashy, but you don't need him to be. He gets the job done, and effectively, it gives you a really solid outing overall. And yeah, I mean, he was nice tonight. I mean, yeah, Manny Rodriguez getting touched up a little bit. You don't love to see. Maples, only needs to get through a third of an inning effectively, but he gives up a walk and a hit. They bring in Rucker. Rucker's able to get out of the jam there in the 9th. But how about Trevor Meagle tonight? I mean, a clean sheet in 2 innings with 3 strikeouts. I mean, I don't know what the hell happened. Maybe this is another guy. I talked to, we mentioned Wilson Contreras maybe being banged up all year. Because Meagle was really good at the start of the season. He showed some flash early on, went on the IL, kind of bounced around a little bit. Seems like he never really got back to where he was. And now in this latest call-up, since effectively the sell-off and everything like that, he's been very good his last couple times out, and a really good 2 innings from him tonight. So, Joe, this is a question that's puzzling me, because I feel like with so many players in the league, you have those Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde type players, right? Like, you don't know which version you're going to get. What version of Trevor Meagle do you think we get, as we being the collective, we being the Cubs, next year from a guy like Meagle? Are we going to see more of the 2 inning, clean sheet, 3 strikeouts, or even at least just good, solid outings, Meagle? Or are we going to see the guy that gets touched up for a bunch of runs that we've seen at points this season? What are your thoughts on Trevor Meagle?
So I think, like you mentioned about Manny Rodriguez, both those guys have high velocity. And it's not like 5-6 years ago where you can get away with velocity 9 times out of 10. That's just not how it works anymore. Sure. You need more than just velocity. And what you saw today was just he was dominating the strike zone with this fastball. But then he also had that curveball really working for him. And he had a really, really good pace, like I mentioned about Wade Miley. Wade Miley had a great pace, and you saw Trevor Meagle come out there and do the same thing for 2 innings. Just rapid pace, give me the ball, get back on the mound. And when you're throwing 98, I mean, that has some effect on the hitters. And then he came in with some dominant breaking stuff. I just don't know how he can do this on a consistent basis. You kind of especially as a bullpen pitcher, if you're hoping he can pitch 3-4 times a week, 3 times, you'd say, what kind of conditioning you can get out of a guy like that. I mean, it doesn't always matter, but it can play a factor if you're pitching at that kind of pace.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we're going to see a lot of Trevor McGill because guys like him are becoming a dime a dozen. That you can get guys that throw high velocity. I could be wrong. I mean, I don't know how old he is. I know he's had very limited major league experience, but guys like him are a dime a dozen. So if the Cubs feel like they can work with him, then you'll see him again next year. If they think they're better off working with somebody else, then that's what they're going to do. But he's not. I don't know if anything he can do in the rest of the season really matters. So it's tough because obviously you'd like to think that if he comes out and does really well these last 30 days that he can earn himself a spot, but I just don't know. There's so much unpredictable, and especially like the bullpens in the MLB just are such a rotating door.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're Craig Kimbrell, guys like that.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, you see bullpen arms get turned over, 15 times in the span of it, like you said, like a Craig Kimbrell guy's type career. So, I mean, he's an interesting player though, and I say that because I mean he's only 27, so he's still. I mean, he's not a up and coming prospect by any means, but he's still overall a relatively young guy. But he's 6'8". I mean, he's just a freaking giant on the mound. Which again plays into that that high velocity and things like that. But I do agree with you to an extent. I think if the Cubs feel very confident with a younger guy that can do something very similar that probably has more team control and they probably aren't going to have to pay as much, that's definitely more appealing than a guy like Trevor McGill. I would say if nothing else, he's at least giving himself a good audition for somebody else potentially in 2022. If he doesn't stick on with the Cubs, maybe somebody else gives him a go and he continues his big league career and at least can, be a productive pitcher because I think he's at least showing glimpses of that. But whether he becomes a more consistent version of himself and can stick around long enough, or does he become a Dylan Maples who you literally don't know what you're getting out of him on a day-to-day basis? And, we've seen plenty of that. I think this is the year that the Dylan Maples experiment ends with the Cubs as well. Another guy that we saw tonight in this one. Well, Joe, again, an unfortunate loss. Cubs were streaking 7 straight entering tonight. They lose, but they can still win the series tomorrow against the Reds. So would you like to go ahead and preview this game tomorrow and we can put this loss behind us then?
Yep, let's do it.
All right, let's do it indeed. So the Cubs and Reds are back at it tomorrow night at beautiful Wrigley Field on Wednesday, September 8th. It is a 6:40 Central Daylight Time start. The Cubs are actually off then on Thursday. So this will conclude this series until they pick up with the Giants then starting on Friday. KB will make his return. So we'll talk a little bit about that one after tomorrow's game. But nonetheless, the Cubs and Reds are back at it, as I mentioned. You can listen and watch in the Cincinnati market at WLW 700, Bally Sports, Ohio. You know the drill. And with the Cubs, 670 The Score, WRTO 1200, and Marquee Sports Network. On the bump for the Reds is Vladimir Gutierrez. The right-hander is 9-6 on the year with a 4.17 ERA and only 76 strikeouts. As for Alec Mills being the Cubs starter, he's 6-6 on the season, 4.25 ERA and 71 Ks. So, Joe, little thoughts from you on tomorrow's game, and a Fly the W pick would be awesome before we go ahead and wrap the show up.
We've seen Gutierrez. I think this will be the third time. I see looking at his record, he's 9-6, and it feels like just not that long ago he made his major league debut against the Cubs. Mm-hmm. So crazy. I think he's already got 15 decisions, but he's been pretty solid. He's got a 4.17 ERA, which all in all, that's pretty solid. Mm-hmm. But it'll be nice to see the normal cast of characters kind of return to the lineup, like Ortega and lefty Ian Happ, even though he had a nice day right-handed. You'll see. Hermosillo did play today, but he was a late addition because Hayward was dealing with a hamstring, I think. So it'll be nice to see the Cubs return to that right or left-handed hitter-heavy lineup. Hopefully, maybe see Ian Happ return. But I'm looking forward to seeing more of Hermosillo, or not Hermosillo, Rivas. He had that 9th inning hit today. He puts together some good at-bats. He had a couple tough calls, and I think it was Boog on the broadcast today mentioning that he had a couple tough strike 3 calls on him looking. It's frustrating for a guy like that who commands the strike zone pretty well and has a pretty good knowledge of what a strike looks like. get beat by a bad strike call. And I understand umps make mistakes. They have their own zones. It's personal, blah, blah, blah. I like human umpires. I like to be angry by human umpires. But that's a topic for a different day. But he knows what he's doing up at the plate. Yeah. And saw him late in the game. Cubs are down to 2 outs. He had 2 strikes on him. Cubs needed a base runner. He serves one into left field for a base hit. And I think he can provide that whenever, like on a daily basis. So I'm excited to see more of him at the plate, and we'll see, where they put him at. He's played some left field today. We'll see if they give maybe Schwindel a day off, put Rivas at first. But regardless of where he's playing, I really like what he's doing so far. And like you mentioned, he's hitting over 300, but in the smallest sample you could have. Yeah. But I really like what I'm seeing from him, so I'm going to go ahead and pick Rivas tomorrow for my Fly the W pick.
I like that pick. I'm a big fan of Rivas, and I think, again, it's – we talk so much on this show about the future and guys like Madrigal and guys like Horner, these high contact, high average type guys. And, you got a guy like Schwindel who's doing a little bit of everything but still hitting for high average. Like Rivas, again, is kind of that, again, one of those high average guys. And unlike Horner and Madrigal, he is a left-handed bat. So I think that makes him an appealing option, potentially on this team. You've mentioned him before as a potential platoon option at first base with a guy like Frank Schwindel maybe in 2022. And I think he has a lot of upside. He's still young, hasn't had a lot of big league time at all. I mean, he just made his debut this year now with the Cubs. Came to the Cubs via the Athletics and the Tony Kemp deal. Joe, you were the one that pointed that out to me when we originally talked about Rivas and where he came from. So I think that's a good pick, and I agree with you, man. I think tomorrow's game is going to be interesting. I'm intrigued to see which version of Alec Mills we get, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean, is he going to have a pitch or two that hang up in the zone? Because we know that the Cincinnati Reds lineup can hit him. I mean, Castellanos, Farmer, I know Votto's got 2 against him in their careers. So, there's some guys that have hit him hard in this Reds lineup. So hopefully we get the Alec Mills that we've seen more, I think, lately, where he's just mowing through guys. And even if he only goes 5, I mean, I feel like he gives you a really good 5 on most nights. But you mentioned a guy that we should see tomorrow hitting exclusively from the left side. He is, as a matter of fact, 3 for 6 against Gutierrez in his career and has a home run. So I am actually going to go ahead and take the red hot Ian Happ as my Fly the W player. I think this guy is just continuing to show what he truly can be. And, I think so many Cubs fans just hope he can keep this up on a consistent basis, because if he can, he looks like the first-round pick that the Cubs made him just a few years ago. He doesn't look like some, first-round bust or can only play in the late months of the year, because let's be honest, if you look back over the last 3 years, he plays his best baseball in August and September. So, if he can give you that consistency, in the months of April through July as well, I mean, he's at least a big leaguer for another 10 years. Maybe he's not an all-star, maybe he's not a superstar, but he's still a good player that every team needs. So I hope he continues his hot run. I think tomorrow's a perfect perfect time for him to do that. Maybe help the Cubs get a nice little series win, even after the incredible win streak, and keep partying like there's some good things happening on the north side, because this team's at least fun to watch despite everything going on in terms of record and ultimately their playoff destination. But so I'm going to roll Ian Happ to counter your Alfonso Rivas pick.
Before we move on, I want to bring back something me and you talked about probably a month and a half ago at this point. Last time the Cubs and Reds were playing against each other was, what would he feel about Ian Happ if he was putting up similar numbers to Eugenio Suarez? And you look at it now, his power numbers aren't quite there, but recently they are. Yeah. Ian Happ just hit his 20th home run today. I think Suarez is at 26, 27, but Suarez is still hitting 165. And Ian Happ, who was struggling to eclipse 180, is now at 217. It's not easy to just randomly raise your batting average 40 points in a 2-month span. So that's remarkable. Whether it's because there's less pressure, who knows? Whether it's just that he likes playing at this time of year better, it's happening. And yeah, we've all known that this player is in there. Yeah. And I think you're seeing that. And, back to what, our question is what would you feel like if he was having a Eugenio Suarez type season? He's outperforming Suarez now. And I think fans are very excited about it, especially, the people that we like to hang around on Cubs Twitter. They haven't given up on Ian Happ, but there's a healthy amount of skepticism.
Mm-hmm.
But we know that he can be this type of player over 162 games.
Absolutely.
So I think, like you said, he's earned himself a corner outfield spot for sure to start the season for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And whether he's able to continue this or not, we'll have to see in 2022. But I'm excited about Ian Happ. Kill me. I don't know. Sue me. That's a better way to put it. Sue me. I'm excited about Ian Happ for 2022. The dude can play.
Yeah. He's a good ball player. I mean, there's no doubt about it. There's a reason he was a first-round pick by this Cubs organization not too long ago. And I agree with you, man. I mean, I do remember that conversation very vividly, talking about the Eugenio Suarez comp, and, the power numbers getting up there. His power numbers have risen, but he's also just raised the average, too. Like, he's not just hitting for power. He's got, 2-3 hit games already just this week?
Yes.
And it's only Tuesday? I guess this week if you include Sunday. But, still, you know what I mean? He's been effective. He's been getting it done at the plate. And I mean, again, if this is the Ian Happ that the Cubs finally can get for a full season, I mean, he is a bona fide big leaguer. Maybe he only hits 250, but the power's there. He is a switch hitter, and he plays at least good enough defense to be worthy of a spot on a team.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, especially with the nature of what the 2022 Cubs should look like, maybe they spend in just a couple of different positions. I think we do still see Ian Happ next season as well. And I'm pumped. I mean, shit, if we get this kind of Ian Happ that we've had since effectively the middle of August, it's going to be a lot of fun to, follow this team again next year and hopefully follow Ian Happ. I mean, I feel like he's a guy that has all-star caliber potential in him. It's just a matter of kind of putting together a full season for him and maybe more regular appearances and more regular at-bats because of, less of a platoon in center field type deal with him. Maybe that's what also benefits him too. And obviously we'll answer that question in 2022, but nonetheless, I'm glad you brought that up again, because you're right. He is outperforming Suarez. Suarez only has him by 6 home runs, and I'm sure Happ has done it in probably less at bats if I had a guess this season as well. So that is a good comp. But sir, do you any final quick thoughts here before we go ahead and wrap this thing up?
No, the Cubs have made it exciting to watch them again. So I'm very thankful for that.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. They've been a lot of fun. And even when they are losing games, this team is still actually enjoyable to watch. And there's still plenty of storylines to keep an eye on. And we'll continue to keep everybody informed here at Cubs on Tap. But I do want to remind everybody that Cubs on Tap is the official Cubs podcast of the On Tap Sports Network. You can see all of our great work over at www.ontapsportsnet.com and at ontapsportsnet on social media. Not only do we have great Cubs coverage, Bears, Bulls, Blackhawks. Bears get started this coming weekend. The Blackhawks and Bulls will both get started in October. So be sure to follow those teams. You can follow the Pod Specific Cubs accounts at Cubbies on Tap, Cubbies. That's Twitter and Instagram. Joe is at Joe on Tap now. I absolutely love that. I am at Loose on Tap, and follow all of our other great contributors at Cody on Tap, at Juice on Tap, at The Riot 326, at Marty Laval, and all who help here with Cubs and just at general and On Tap Sportsnet. And yes, Cubs fans, we have all got at least one friend that's a White Sox fan. Go ahead and bring them over to On Tap as well, because our Sox on Tap guys do an excellent job covering the Southsiders. So once again, www.ontapsportsnet.com, at ontapsportsnet on social media, the OnTap Sports Network. Go ahead and check out what's on tap in Chicago sports. Joe, despite the loss, it's always a pleasure to jump on the microphone with you, sir. Cubs lose today 4-3 to the Cincinnati Reds, ending their 7-game win streak. However, they have an opportunity tomorrow evening, that is, to take this series 2 out of 3 against Cincinnati and roll into an off day then on Thursday. So we will be back with you here at Cubs on Tap after tomorrow's game. And Joe, what do you say, man? We get out of here the only way we know how to after a Cubs game?
Let's do it. Let's go Cubbies.
Let's go Cubbies.